We're going to take you through some tips for the kettlebell clean now to help you avoid common mistakes. The first thing that we're going to look at is keeping the elbow nice and close to the body, both on the way up and on the way down. So I'll get Rowan to do a couple of reps correctly, and just notice how close his elbow stays to his body. This makes the clean a lot smoother. If he does them incorrectly now and pushes them out too far and brings the kettlebell out too far before pulling it back in, you'll notice what happens. Bang. So if you bring it too far away from your body, it becomes very inefficient, and on the way back up in particular, that's when you'll get impact on the forearm and the bicep, which is the most common complaint with the clean. The next thing that we're going to look at is releasing the grip early. This will also help with a smooth landing and getting the kettlebell in that correct position. If you grip it tightly throughout, you'll find that it'll land too high on your hand, and you'll also have it come over, bang, on the back of your wrist. So if Rowan does a couple correctly, see how early he releases his grip. So he's spearing his fingers through and open his hand right up just to demonstrate how early he actually lets go of the kettlebell. So it's actually somewhere around here. He'll let go completely. If he does it incorrectly and grips really tightly throughout the movement, you'll notice it comes over, bangs him on the forearm. So I'll just get him to do a couple incorrectly. Bang. And bang. So you can see what happens there. Alright, the next thing that we're going to look at is cleaning directly to the rack position. So as much as possible, you just want to get straight from that backswing into the rack position. You don't need to do any extra movement. So for example, you don't need to dip under it as you would with an Olympic clean with a barbell, because we're using what are really very light weights here. Even if you're doing what you think is a heavy kettlebell clean, it's still reasonably light. The other thing that you want to avoid is out to the side and back down, unless you're just setting up for a jerk set. So I'll get Rowan to do a couple of reps correctly facing the camera so that you can see how directly the kettlebell gets up into rack position. No fuss, straight in, back down, and straight back up to the rack. So you want to avoid things like catching it on the elbow, bringing it back in. So I'll get Rowan to do a couple incorrectly. It just makes the movement inefficient, basically. And it will slow you right down. If you're wanting to go at a faster pace for, say, cleans or clean and jerk or anything like that, that will slow you down a lot. Okay, the next thing that we're going to look at is not catching the kettlebell on the forearm. So you don't want this part to take the brunt of the clean. It's really important that this part isn't doing all the work for you, because you can end up with stress fractures. So in terms of safety, this is really, really important. So I'll get Rowan to do a couple of reps correctly. What you should see happening is that the kettlebell lands in this V as it lands. So the bicep is actually doing most of the work for him and taking the brunt of the clean. What you don't want is to catch the kettlebell on the forearm and then bring it back into the body. That can actually look quite smooth, but it is dangerous if the forearm's doing all the work for you. So I'll get Rowan to do a couple of cleans correctly, and just watch. So you should see that the bicep still does most of the work here. So it's going directly to that V. It's not catching it on the forearm first. If he does them incorrectly, and this is really, really subtle, it can be quite hard to see. If he does it incorrectly and catches it on the forearm first, it'll come out and be pulled back in that way. He'll also feel it more. So you can see it actually still looks quite smooth. Forearm, bicep. Forearm, bicep. So that's one to really watch out for. The next thing that we're going to look at is using proportionate power for the clean. So if you're cleaning a 12 kilo kettlebell or an 8 kilo kettlebell, you really don't need to put a whole heap of power into it. You want to make the power proportionate to the weight that you're using. So I'll get Rowan to do a couple of cleans correctly. And a 12 kilo bell is very light for him. So he's not, all the movement's the same as if he was doing it with a heavier, he's just only applying as much power as is necessary. Because if he tries to apply far too much power, that's when you're going to end up with more impact on your forearm, shoulders, all the rest of it. So I'll get him to do a couple with a bit too much juice in them. Bang. You can see it often also stuffs up the hand position that it lands in. If you put too much power into it, it will often land in the reverse. So instead of being this way on your hand, it'll land on the opposite diagonal. So just watch out for that one. Often means that you're putting too much power in for the weight that you're using. We're just going to talk very quickly about the use of gloves. With the kettlebell clean, gloves are a real no-no. Because it's so important to get the kettlebell to land in the correct position on your hand, gloves can impair this, and they can also just impair your ability to feel what the kettlebell is doing in your hand. So if it's a matter of having sore hands, blisters and that sort of stuff, just reduce the volume that you're doing, maybe reduce the weight that you're doing. Your hands are going to be the last thing to adapt usually. So steer clear of the gloves, let your hands toughen up, and make sure that you can actually feel what the kettlebell's doing so that you can land it safely. The next thing that we're going to look at quickly is making sure that you use the lower body. This is really a lower body powered movement. It's not an upper body movement. So if Rowan does a couple of cleans correctly, you'll see that it's all leg work. The legs are doing everything for him. The arm is basically just there to catch the kettlebell in rack position, guide it into the right spot, make sure nothing funny is going on. If he does it incorrectly and tries to use his upper body, which is what a lot of strong people will tend to do, you'll see it almost turns into like a bicep curl. So he's tense through the arm, he's tense all through this part here, which is actually, if you're going to do this repetitively or with heavy bells, can turn into a risk for tendonitis. There we go. And it just becomes a clunky, inefficient movement. So make sure that you are using your lower body, very little upper body work. Okay, the last thing I'm going to talk about very quickly, as far as tips for the clean go, is the use of chalk. If you're going for longer sets, or if you're wanting to use heavier bells, chalk can be really good. So I've got a bell chalked here, and I will put it on a video about chalking the kettlebell. But the chalk will really help preserve your grip and make you be able to either last for a little bit longer, or you might be able to clean heavier. But I do recommend chalk for cleans. So that's it. There are some really good tips for you to help make sure that you avoid those common mistakes that a lot of people make with the kettlebell clean.